Welcome back to Fedrix Lens. Today, I want to show you why one object on Elon Musk's bedside table may reveal more than people realize. At first glance, it just looks like a gun. That is what most people see. A gun-shaped object beside the bed of one of the most powerful and talked about men in the world. And that alone is enough to get attention. But the deeper story starts when you stop asking, why does he have a gun there? And start asking a better question. Why that gun? Because this was not just some ordinary bedside weapon. It was identified as a replica of the Diamondback .357 from the video game Deus Ex, Human Revolution. And the moment you realize that, the image changes. Now it is no longer just about protection. It is no longer just about personal taste. Now it becomes symbolic. Now it becomes intentional. Now it becomes something closer to a message. And once you see that, it becomes very hard to unsee. Because the Diamondback .357 is not just a cool-looking fictional revolver. It comes from a world built around hidden power, corporate control, surveillance, human enhancement, and the manipulation of society through systems people barely understand. That is the universe this object comes from. And now that object is sitting quietly on a real bedside table, in a real photo, posted by a real billionaire whose name is already tied to rockets, AI, platforms, influence, and future-facing technology. That is where this stops being random. Think about it. Out of all the objects in the world, out of all the designs, out of all the things that could sit next to a bed, why place a weapon from a cyberpunk control universe into the frame? Maybe it was casual. Maybe it was aesthetic. Maybe it was just something he liked. But even if that is all it was, symbols still speak. Objects still carry meaning. And sometimes a person tells you exactly who they are, not through words, but through the things they keep close. That is where this gets interesting. Because the bedside table is not just furniture. It is one of the most intimate surfaces in a room. It is what sits beside you when the day ends. It is what stays close when the world is shut out. It is where people place what matters enough to keep near. And that means this object was not just owned. It was positioned. And once an object is positioned in a place like that, it starts to act differently. It stops being just an item. It becomes part of an atmosphere, part of a personal ritual, part of a carefully revealed world. Now here is where the deeper layer begins. If this were just a normal real handgun, the reading would be much simpler. You could say it signals protection. You could say it signals fear. You could say it signals status, confidence, masculinity, or preparedness. But because this is a replica, something more modern happens. The force becomes symbolic. The danger becomes curated. The threat becomes aesthetic. And that may be the real key to this whole image. Because we live in a world where power no longer always has to show itself directly. Sometimes power works better when it is softened into style. Sometimes it works better as a signal. Sometimes it works better as something that looks dangerous, feels dangerous, carries the aura of danger, but remains controlled enough to be shared, photographed, and consumed by the public. That is what makes this object powerful. It does not need to function fully to communicate fully. Read that again in your mind. It does not need to function fully to communicate fully. That is one of the deepest truths of the age we are living in. Because so much of modern life works like that now. Not full force, but the image of force. Not direct command, but pressure through atmosphere. Not total control, but carefully designed influence. Not reality in its raw form, but reality filtered through symbols, screens, branding, and personal mythology. And suddenly, this bedside object starts to look less like a random collectible and more like a perfect object for this era. Because the Diamondback .357 is not just a weapon, it is a signal device. It says something without speaking. It projects something without moving. It shapes interpretation before anyone even begins to explain it. And that is where the audience becomes part of the machine. Because once the image is released, people begin doing the rest of the work themselves. Some people see confidence. Some people see performance. Some people see a warning. Some people see a billionaire playing with myth. Some people see irony. Some people see the future staring back at them in the form of a bedside prop. And the amazing part is this. The object becomes stronger because different people read it differently. That ambiguity is not weakness. That ambiguity is power. Because the most effective symbolic objects do not lock people into one meaning. They invite interpretation. They pull attention. They create conversation. They linger in the mind. And the Diamondback does exactly that. Now let's go one level deeper. Why does it matter that this object comes from Deus Ex specifically? Because Deus Ex is one of those fictional worlds that feels uncomfortably close to real life. It is about technology and power merging together. It is about control becoming invisible. It is about systems shaping people from above while still making those people feel like they are choosing freely. And whether intentional or not, placing that object beside the bed sends a strange and powerful message. It places the owner inside that same symbolic universe. Not as a spectator, but as a participant. Almost as if the line between fiction and reality has become thinner than we want to admit. And maybe that is why this image sticks in people's minds. Because it feels like more than taste. It feels like alignment. It feels like an object chosen from a world of engineered futures being placed into our own world by someone actively helping shape the future. That is why it feels charged. That is why it feels a little uncanny. That is why it grabs attention more than a normal revolver ever would. Because this is not frontier symbolism. This is futurist symbolism. This is not old power. This is updated power. It is cleaner, smarter, more stylized, more memorable, more shareable, more native to a world where images move faster than explanation. And that takes us to the biggest insight of all. The Diamondback .357 matters because it shows how modern power presents itself now. Not always through speeches. Not always through uniforms. Not always through obvious authority. Sometimes through personal objects. Sometimes through the careful staging of a room. Sometimes through an image that looks casual, but carries a complete script inside it. A script about control. A script about readiness. A script about identity. A script about someone living comfortably beside symbols of power, danger, and futurist myth. In older times, rulers displayed power through crowns, swords, thrones, and monuments. Today, power often reveals itself through smaller things. A post, a desk, a shelf, a room, a bedside table. And that is why this object matters more than it first appears. It is not just about a gun. It is about a world where symbols now do part of the work that force used to do openly. A world where a replica can still carry authority. A world where the image of danger can shape perception, even when the danger itself is controlled. A world where fiction, branding, and personal mythology blend so smoothly that people stop noticing where one ends and the next begins. So the final read is this. The Diamondback .357 on Elon Musk's bedside table is not just a decorative object. It is a carefully loaded symbol, a piece of curated danger, a fragment of cyberpunk mythology placed inside real life. A message that says power today does not only operate through systems, it also operates through symbols, through atmosphere, through the objects people choose to keep closest. And maybe that is the real reason this image keeps pulling people back. Because deep down, it feels like more than a bedside table. It feels like a small window into how modern power wants to be seen. Look closer, see further, decide for yourself. And if this kind of decoding is your lane, like, comment, and subscribe to Fedrix Lens.